In the heart of a federal courthouse, Jasmine Crockett, once a civil rights attorney, now a global icon, stood alone against a system built to break her. She faced public humiliation, contempt charges, and a judge's order to issue a public apology or be jailed. All because she defended a whistleblower with a truth too dangerous to bury. But what she uncovered in the dead of night would bring CEOs to their knees and change American law forever. The question is, what did she find that made the world stop and listen? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. The sky over Houston was a soft amber, painted with the subtle melancholy of a southern autumn morning. But there was nothing gentle about the energy around the federal courthouse on Rush Street. Lines stretched for blocks, winding around barricades, past news vans bristling with satellite dishes. Cameramen adjusted tripods, journalists rehearsed their intros, and protesters held signs, some praising justice, others demanding silence. Inside, federal marshals scanned IDs with more intensity than usual, their eyes sharp, their tone clipped. Something bigger than a court hearing was brewing. It felt like the tipping point of a national reckoning, and at the heart of the storm was one woman, Jasmine Crockett, once celebrated as the firebrand attorney who took on crooked police departments and won. She now stood accused of violating the very legal processes she swore to defend. Not by theft, not by corruption, but by speech, by refusing to stay silent. Jasmine Crockett had become a household name for her bold courtroom takedowns and razor-sharp commentary on civil rights. She was a voice for the voiceless. But now that voice had landed her in the crosshairs of the system she fought to uphold. The charge? Undue influence on an ongoing federal case, allegedly manipulating public opinion and media coverage in a racially charged lawsuit against a powerful defense tech corporation, Aaron Systems. What she called defending the truth, prosecutors labeled contempt for judicial neutrality. The implications were enormous. If found liable, it would not only end her career, but redefine how far an attorney could go in the digital age. When defending a client in the court of public opinion, and the person deciding her fate, Judge Coney Barrett, the former Supreme Court Justice, brought back to preside over this case due to its constitutional complexity and national significance. Barrett's presence in the courtroom was thunderous, despite her calm demeanor. With her signature judicial poise and unwavering stare, she embodied everything Crockett had spent her career challenging: structure, conservatism, and a blind faith in the written law. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a clash of ideologies. The courtroom, paneled in dark oak, felt like a coliseum, the air thick with anticipation and the weight of impending consequence. Reporters scribbled notes with shaking hands. Court artists sketched furiously. On one side, government attorneys, polished, calm, prepared. On the other, Jasmine Crockett, in a Navy power suit, surrounded by a minimalist legal team, lean, sharp, grimly determined. She sat motionless, lips pressed into a straight line, her eyes locked not on the judge, but on the empty jury box, waiting for the nation's verdict. The courtroom wasn't just full, it was overflowing. Retired generals, human rights advocates, tech CEOs, law students, packed into every bench, every hallway, every overflow room. Crockett's name had split the country in two. To some, she was a hero, to others, a manipulator. But no one doubted her power. Her firm, Crockett and Justice, had taken on the titans. Her words, they shaped headlines. And today, her defiance stood on trial. The moment Judge Barrett took her seat, the hum in the room dropped a full octave. The stage was set, the silence, deafening, and the stakes, nothing short of historic. But the silence wasn't just about Jasmine. It echoed the voice of a man who'd been erased by corporate power and political silence. Isaiah Brooks never planned to be a whistleblower. He was a systems engineer, quiet, brilliant, disciplined. One of the few black professionals in Aaron Systems' elite drone division. For years, he delivered flawless code, tuned flight algorithms, did his job, made drones smarter, faster, until 6 months before his firing, he found something terrifying: a security breach buried deep in the drone's core system, a vulnerability that could let a foreign hacker hijack an entire squadron with a single script. He reported it immediately, expecting escalation. Instead, H.R.reevaluated. 3 days later, he was escorted out under armed security and a non-disclosure agreement shoved into his chest like a gag order. But Isaiah wasn't done, because Jasmine said yes when no one else would touch it. She took the case, and then she went public. Standing on the courthouse steps next to Isaiah, she spoke to 2 million followers. If he stays silent, thousands of lives could be at risk. And if I stay silent, justice dies with him. The video, it exploded. 30 million views, 48 hours, debates, outrage, whispers in boardrooms and DOJs alike. Some called her brave, others reckless. But one thing was certain: she put Aaron Systems on notice, and they wanted blood. The company's legal team moved with surgical precision. They filed an emergency motion claiming Crockett had violated ethical boundaries. They accused her of inciting public bias, of tampering with the impartiality of the court. They didn't argue facts. They attacked her methods, her presence, her voice. The atmosphere inside the courtroom was taut, brittle, like a cable, stretched too far across a canyon. One word could snap it. The crowd, packed into every inch of the chamber, sat frozen, eyes locked on the elevated bench. Judge Amy Coney Barrett, draped in a black robe that caught no light and gave no warmth, looked down over her glasses at Jasmine Crockett. There was no preamble, no slow build. The ruling came like a door slamming shut. "Ms. Crockett," she said, voice even, but with the weight of law behind every syllable, "this court has reviewed the public materials you released, specifically the video content and statements published online." She paused. "Let me be clear, you have crossed a line." A quiet rustle passed through the courtroom. Jasmine didn't blink. Her fingers remained interlaced, but her knuckles had whitened. Barrett continued, voice cool, clipped. "You are hereby ordered to remove all related content, videos, posts, comments, from all public platforms, within 24 hours, no exceptions." A murmur swelled, quickly hushed by a marshal's glare. The judge leaned slightly forward. "Furthermore, this court directs you to issue a formal, public apology to both the defense and to this institution, acknowledging that your conduct, while perhaps well-intentioned, has undermined the impartiality this case demands. This apology will be made in writing, delivered to the court, and made publicly accessible. Not optional." Jasmine's jaw stayed firm, but a muscle near her temple twitched, subtle, but to those watching, unmistakable. Barrett wasn't finished. "Finally," she said, her tone sharpening, enough to silence even the faintest whisper, "you are hereby prohibited from making any additional public commentary regarding these proceedings until the trial has formally concluded. Any violation will be met with immediate sanctions, including but not limited to fines, removal from the case, and charges of contempt." There it was, stripped of fanfare, dressed in legal precision, but delivered like a guillotine. Jasmine had spent years in rooms full of power, but never had silence been weaponized like this. This wasn't about a video. This was about control, about a system demanding she step back in line, fold her voice into paperwork, and let the courtroom alone dictate what the world could know. To the court, it was safety. To Jasmine, it was a threat, a warning: tread carefully or be made an example. And just when it seemed the orders had landed, Judge Barrett delivered the final blow, not as a warning, but as a promise, written in the language of power. The room held its breath. No one moved. No one dared interrupt what came next. Not even the rustle of a page. Not the shuffle of a shoe. Judge Amy Coney Barrett leaned slightly forward, her voice dropping to a measured tone. Somehow, even more commanding than before. To ensure compliance, she said, her eyes locked on Jasmine, this court is authorizing a daily monetary sanction in the amount of $250,000. She let the number hang, like a hanging verdict. Every single day that the content remains accessible, every day you defy this order, is another day that penalty will accumulate, without cap, without negotiation. There was no room for misinterpretation, no legal gray area, just a raw, financial guillotine poised above Jasmine's head. The figure wasn't just punitive, it was symbolic. $250,000 a day, not to punish, but to break. Murmurs swept the courtroom, like wind through dry leaves, quickly silenced by a sharp look from the bailiff. Jasmine's attorneys exchanged glances, tightening with restrained disbelief, but the judge was not finished. She paused, letting the threat settle like dust in the lungs. Then, her tone shifted, cool turned to cold. Furthermore, she continued, this court reserves the right to issue a contempt citation, should you fail to comply. That includes the use of custodial enforcement. The meaning, unmistakable. Jail, incarceration. If Jasmine didn't comply, she wouldn't just be fined. She could be locked away. The term custodial enforcement sounded clinical, but its reality was brutal. A holding cell, stripped of her voice, her freedom, her presence in court, all for refusing to retract her truth. Faced with the full weight of the law, crushing fines, jail time, systematic erasure of her voice, Jasmine Crockett did not retreat. Instead, she stood. The silence was suffocating, but Jasmine moved through it, like she had 1,000 times before, in rooms where her presence was questioned, where her authority was measured, in eyebrows and tones. She pushed her chair back, slowly, the scrape of wood on tile, unnaturally loud in the stillness. She stood tall. Her navy suit caught light at the shoulders, but her posture radiated more authority than any tailored fabric could offer. Her hand rested calmly on the table, then lifted down slowly, confidently. Folding before her midsection, her gaze locked onto the bench. When she finally spoke, her voice was not raised, not rushed, but perfectly measured. Your Honor, she said, tone steady as stone, I understand the seriousness of this court's instructions. A pause, and I acknowledge that I may have strayed from procedure in how I brought attention to this case. Another pause, deliberate now. But let me be very clear, I did not stray from the truth. The tension snapped tighter, like a wire, drawn past its limit. No one moved, not even Judge Barrett. Known for her composure, she blinked. Once, slowly. Jasmine continued, unwavering. The content I shared didn't misrepresent facts. It didn't manufacture outrage. It exposed a real threat, one that could endanger lives, including civilians and service members. I didn't speak to inflame. I spoke to inform. And if this system punishes truth because it doesn't like the form it's delivered in, then we don't have a contempt of court issue. We have a contempt for transparency. Her voice didn't tremble. Her breath never hitched. Every sentence locked in, loaded, not to provoke, but to make the court listen. I will not pretend that silence in the name of etiquette is more valuable than action in the name of public safety. She turned slightly, not away from the judge, but toward the courtroom itself. I'm not above the law, but I'm also not beneath it. And I will not apologize for defending a client who was fired for doing the right thing. I won't apologize for refusing to let his voice be buried under bureaucracy. And I will not apologize for doing what too many are afraid to do, speak loudly when silence serves the powerful. Then she turned back, and in the clearest voice she had used all morning, delivered the line that would echo far beyond those walls. I may be wrong on procedure, but I am not wrong on the truth. She sat down. No fanfare, no fist to the table, just silence. But this time, a different kind of silence. Not the one imposed by fear, but the kind that follows a strike too clean to respond to. She didn't smile, didn't flinch, didn't waver, not even for a second. The courtroom had quieted, but Jasmine's mind hadn't. And while the law demanded her silence, her instinct told her the truth still had a pulse, waiting to be found. That night, Jasmine did not sleep, because sleep is for those who trust the process. And Jasmine, she'd seen too much for that. Instead of resting, she returned to her firm's downtown office, where the silence felt like an interrogation lamp. At the center of that room, Rev. Bill Travis, once an old-school muckraker, armed now with nothing but a laptop and decades of instincts. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The urgency said enough. Jasmine opened internal files from Aaron Systems, files ignored during pretrial. She traced email chains, metadata logs, access reports. Bill focused on video analysis, running side-by-side comparisons of the footage used against her. Together, they combed through every byte like miners looking for the last sliver of oxygen in a collapsing tunnel. Jasmine flagged inconsistencies in dates, emails forwarded without context, logs, missing key entries. Reverend Travis traced video edits, cut frames, missing audio blips, time codes that didn't align. She recovered files marked reviewed, but never followed up. Meeting notes, vague, sanitized. The deeper they went, the clearer it became. This wasn't oversight. It was a mission, intentional, coordinated. Jasmine felt the truth forming, line by line, frame by frame. They hadn't just tried to silence her. They tried to erase the very foundation of what Isaiah Brooks had risked everything to report. And then, just past 3 a.m., buried beneath doctored files and digital debris, they uncovered what no one wanted to see. The truth, raw, undeniable. The first bombshell came in pixels. Reverend Travis froze the video, frame by frame, isolating time codes, comparing the original with the doctored version. There, he said, eyes narrowing. A skipped audio, half a second, just enough to distort her tone, not enough for the untrained eye to catch. They overlaid both versions, and the edit became clear. Key phrases removed, her tone distorted, the message manipulated. The court hadn't just been misled. They were shown a manufactured narrative, designed to make Jasmine look like a threat. Instead of a defender, her voice had been turned into a weapon against herself. Jasmine leaned back, jaw clenched, as if steadying herself against the weight of it. But what came next was worse. Jasmine opened a cache of internal Aaron Systems emails, many flagged for deletion, but still lingering in a backup server. One thread made her blood run cold. Subject line, terminate before press leaks. Attached, a draft of Isaiah Brooks' termination notice. Then came the message. He's a liability. Kill the story before it starts. The signature at the bottom, unmistakable. The CEO himself. No ambiguity, no deniability. Brooks wasn't fired for discipline. He was terminated, strategically, preemptively, deliberately. She clicked into his personnel file next. For months, glowing reviews, precise, team-oriented, technically brilliant. Then, just a week after his internal report, resistant to feedback, potential security concern, volatile under pressure, no incidents, no supporting documentation, just language built to smear. She followed the digital trail, internal chat logs, managers frustrated. He's asking too many questions. He's going to become a PR nightmare if this surfaces. By the time the full picture came into focus, the room felt heavier, Jasmine leaned back, surrounded by a constellation of screens, videos, emails, records. Isaiah Brooks hadn't been fired for misconduct. He had been targeted, labeled, erased for doing the right thing. And Jasmine? She wasn't reckless. She had been set up. The video doctored, the truth buried. But now, for the first time, she had the receipts to prove it. She had the proof. But this wasn't about evidence anymore. It was about showing up, unarmed by protocol but fully armed by truth, to a courtroom that had already decided how loud she was allowed to be. Jasmine stepped through the metal detectors, alone. No aides, no counsel, no press waiting outside. The black cotton of her shirt, plain, unbranded, clung softly to her frame, her hair tied back, her face no makeup. She looked like someone stripped to essence, not defeat. In her right hand, a single tablet, slim, matte, silent. Her heels struck the tile, a rhythm louder than necessary, but no one dared speak over it. When she entered the courtroom, all eyes turned. Not a spectacle, but something sharper, quieter, deadlier. She crossed the aisle, slowly. The benches once held her legal team, now empty, deliberately. Her eyes never glanced at opposing counsel, never acknowledged the press. They were locked on Judge Amy Coney Barrett. Jasmine stopped in front of the table, set down the tablet with care, and waited. No papers, no team to whisper objections, no strategy in motion. Just one woman facing the full weight of the law. Judge Barrett addressed her, tone crisp. Ms. Crockett, this is your opportunity to respond before the court proceeds with its findings. Do you wish to speak? Jasmine didn't hesitate. She stepped forward and began. Your Honor, she said, her voice calm but clear. I understand the court's position. I understand the seriousness of what's been asked of me. She drew in a breath, not shaky, but measured. I want to acknowledge that my actions may have disrupted the expected flow of these proceedings. I accept that. I accept responsibility for that disruption. Her tone, respectful, unwavering. And for that disruption, for stepping outside the bounds of this court's protocol, I offer my sincere apology. She paused. Let it settle. Let it breathe. Then her voice returned, quieter, but sharper. But I cannot, and I will not, apologize for speaking the truth. There was no drama, no theatrics, just one sentence, hanging in the air, like a verdict of its own. I was asked to be quiet because what I said made others uncomfortable. Not because it was false, but because it was true. She turned slightly, not away from the judge, but to the room itself. Her tone didn't change, but her words did. I was threatened with financial ruin, with jail time, with silence. I was told I had no right to speak until this trial ended. But what I said, it was never fiction. It was never meant to wound. It was meant to warn. She tapped her tablet once and stopped. I don't bring this to make noise. I bring it because the truth belongs in this room as much as the law does. Her voice dropped, just slightly as she concluded. I may have stepped outside the system, but I did not step outside of integrity. If the price of standing up for what's right is being held in contempt, then so be it. But I will not apologize for defending the truth when the truth was what everyone else was trying to avoid. Then she said nothing more. No plea, no elaboration. Just stepped back, folded her hands, and waited, calm, exposed, completely unafraid. And then, under the scrutiny of the very court that had tried to silence her, Jasmine turned on the screen and turned the tide. She stepped toward the evidence monitor, not with bravado, but with the steady weight of someone carrying more than proof. She was carrying vindication. With the courtroom in silence, Jasmine tapped her tablet. Once, the screen flickered. And the truth came alive. The first file, the unedited video. her original footage. No cuts, no glitches, no courtroom manipulation. Her voice echoed from the speaker, calm, controlled, measured. She warned of danger, yes, but with respect, never contempt. The contrast were staggering. The court had been shown a version where she sounded defiant, combative. But now, they heard what had really been said. A plea for transparency, not rebellion. She let the video run, 30 full seconds, long enough to make its authenticity undeniable. Then, she turned back to the judge. This, she said, is what was taken from context. This is what you ruled on. This is what they edited to make me look like a threat. She didn't wait. Another tap. A second file loaded. A plain text email thread from Aaron Systems' internal archives. The subject line, personnel risk assessment, urgent, timestamp. 3 days before Isaiah Brooks was terminated. The first email, vague, but the second stopped the room cold. Terminate before it gets legs. Use insubordination. Keep it quiet. Jasmine highlighted the signature. The company's CEO. Not speculative. Not theory. A direct order. To silence a whistleblower. Her voice, even, but firmer now. This isn't secondhand. This isn't theory. This is a command. To shut down the truth before it could surface. She let the words linger. Didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Finally, the third file. A series of internal HR evaluations, audit logs, performance reviews. The screen split into 2 columns. Left, positive assessments. Dependable. Skilled. Effective. Right, after his report. Non-compliant. Disruptive. Potential risk. But Jasmine didn't stop. She brought up version history. The edits? Time-stamped. 2 days after the report, 1 day before dismissal. They didn't fire him for misconduct, Jasmine said, her tone level, but laced with steel. They fired him to bury what he found, and then they rewrote the record to justify it. A hush spread through the courtroom like smoke. You could hear breaths being held, hands frozen mid-note, even the faint buzz of the courtroom lights. Jasmine looked up from the screen, meeting Judge Barrett's eyes without blinking. The judge didn't speak at first. She removed her glasses, slowly, setting them down with care. Her gaze drifted from the screen to Jasmine, then back again. The silence hung heavy until she finally spoke. Her voice quieter than usual, but absolutely clear. This, she said, is evidence substantial enough to justify reopening the case in its entirety. No reaction from Jasmine, no relief, no smile. She only nodded once, slowly, because this wasn't a victory. Not yet. It was just the first moment someone in power had finally admitted the truth deserved to be seen. What followed Jasmine's presentation wasn't applause or vindication. It was motion, swift and seismic, as the machinery of justice, long dormant, was finally forced to move. Within hours of the courtroom recessing, Judge Coney Barrett convened an emergency session, behind closed doors but under a pressure brighter than any spotlight. Her ruling was concise, but it landed like a controlled explosion. All punitive measures against Jasmine Crockett were to be suspended, effective immediately. The daily fines, frozen, the threat of contempt, withdrawn, and the gag order, lifted, declared legally unsound in light of the now verified evidence. Her words were calm but laced with quiet acknowledgement, not only of the court's misstep, but of the dangerous precedent it had nearly set. Jasmine had not just challenged the court, she had corrected it. And Barrett, for all her rigidity, was not too proud to reverse course when the truth left her no room to stand. But the fallout didn't stop at the bench. News of the ruling broke like a thunderclap across media outlets, corporate boardrooms, and government channels. Within 24 hours, the Department of Justice announced a formal investigation into Aaron Systems, citing credible evidence of retaliation, evidence tampering, and possible obstruction of justice. The same emails Jasmine had revealed in court, ones the company had previously claimed didn't exist, were now being reviewed by federal agents. Search warrants were issued. Internal audits that had collected dust were reopened. And what had started as one wrongful termination case quickly metastasized into something far more serious: a systemic failure to protect whistleblowers in a sector that built weapons of war. Three names stood out in the DOJ's initial statement: Aaron Systems' chief operating officer, head of HR, and general counsel. Each had been directly copied on the termination emails. Each had signed off on performance reviews, rewritten to discredit Isaiah Brooks. And each had approved legal strategies designed to paint Jasmine as a reckless agitator rather than a defender of truth. By the next business day, all three were placed on indefinite suspension pending investigation. Their access revoked, their offices sealed, their reputations, once polished and guarded, now sat in the crosshairs of a federal probe they could no longer control. Jasmine did not gloat. She did not hold a press conference. She simply walked out of the courthouse the way she had walked in, head high, jaw steady, the tablet that had shifted the balance of power still clutched in her hand. But the world around her was moving now, and it was moving fast. The narrative had flipped. The woman they tried to silence had become the reason the system was being forced to speak. And at the heart of that narrative was Isaiah Brooks. His name, once buried in redacted reports and backdated memos, now returned to headlines with a different weight. The DOJ's statement referred to him not as a former employee, but as a protected federal witness. For the first time since his termination, he stood publicly recognized not as a liability, but as a truth teller. His personnel file, once riddled with doctored critiques, was formally restored. Every negative evaluation struck from the record. His reputation, shattered behind closed doors, was now publicly repaired in front of the nation. And then came the moment no one expected, but everyone watching hoped for. Aaron Systems issued a formal apology. It wasn't eloquent, it wasn't emotional, but it was official. The company acknowledged that Brooks's firing was not properly vetted, that his internal safety concerns were legitimate, that his dismissal may have been influenced by a failure in internal oversight. It was corporate language, measured, calculated, and lawyer-approved, but underneath it was something real. Accountability, however late it had arrived. More than that, Brooks received full back pay, adjusted for interest, along with a seven-figure settlement that included legal damages and federal whistleblower compensation. For a man who had once been escorted out by security under the label of insubordination, it was not just justice, it was reclamation. The injustice he had suffered could not be undone. The isolation, the financial loss, the humiliation. But for the first time, he wasn't standing alone. Jasmine had done more than restore his name. She had ripped open a system that had conspired to erase him and forced it to answer for every step it took in silence. And in the hallways of power, people were paying attention. Members of Congress called for emergency hearings on whistleblower protections in defense contracts. Advocacy groups began pushing for reforms in evidence disclosure and judicial transparency. Ethics watchdogs demanded reviews of every closed case involving Aaron Systems in the last decade. The ripple effects were immediate, but at the center of it all, amid the noise and headlines, two names now stood tethered forever, not in scandal, but in courage. Jasmine Crockett, Isaiah Brooks, two people the system had tried to erase, two people who refused to disappear, and now in the very institutions that had tried to silence them, their voices had become too loud to ignore. But for Jasmine Crockett, exposing the truth was never the endgame. It was only the beginning of something far greater, a blueprint for justice no one could quietly dismantle again. She didn't wait for Congress. She didn't wait for another headline, another panel, or another press cycle to spin her story into something more comfortable, less disruptive. Within 10 days of the courtroom eruption, Jasmine Crockett made her next move. Not as a lawyer, not even as a survivor of institutional pushback, but as an architect of reform. She announced the launch of the Truth Guard Initiative, a $75 million fund backed by private donors, public interest coalitions, and, most notably, a portion of her own wrongful sanctions settlement, which she refused to accept as personal compensation. She stood at the podium at the National Press Club in D.C., wearing the same black shirt she had worn into court, and said, "This isn't about retribution. This is about reconstruction. because the truth shouldn't have to fight this hard to survive. The mission was clear and brutally necessary. TruthGuard would do what courts, corporations, and committees had repeatedly failed to: protect whistleblowers before they were silenced, not after they were destroyed. Jasmine had seen firsthand how truth was punished while lies were insulated behind NDAs and legal fees. So she designed the fund to strike where injustice was strongest: in silence, in bureaucracy, in fear. One-third of TruthGuard's resources were designated for whistleblower protection, including emergency relocation, independent legal counsel, and encrypted reporting networks staffed by vetted investigators. These weren't theoretical promises. They were mechanisms, ready and functioning, built with the same precision Jasmine had once brought to courtrooms, now directed at structural defense. The second arm of the initiative focused on public interest legal aid, specifically funding pro bono attorneys who took on cases involving federal contractors, defense tech, and private surveillance firms. Jasmine had learned that the people most likely to witness institutional abuse were also the ones least likely to have the resources to fight it. TruthGuard would change that. No more underfunded legal teams going up against billion-dollar defense conglomerates. No more grassroots attorneys being outspent into silence. If a case smelled like cover-up, TruthGuard would pay for the fight, from discovery to deposition. But perhaps the most radical piece of the fund, the one that drew both applause and immediate resistance, was its third and final pillar: direct oversight of ethical compliance within the defense tech sector. Jasmine wasn't just funding watchdogs, she was creating a system where corporate ethics, especially in high-security environments, could be monitored by an independent civilian board with full investigative powers. That meant audits. That meant whistleblower testimony had to be reviewed. That meant companies like Aaron Systems no longer got to define the truth for themselves. And then, without warning or press leaks, Jasmine named her first appointment: Isaiah Brooks. The man they tried to erase was now being elevated to the position of Executive Director of Ethical Oversight within TruthGuard, a role with full authority to approve or deny how the initiative's resources were used in matters involving corporate integrity. When asked why she chose him, Jasmine's response was as precise as it was devastating: because he's the only one in this entire case who told the truth before it was safe to. Isaiah had refused every interview request since the verdict, but when Jasmine called him, he said yes without hesitation. And when he stepped to the microphone during the TruthGuard announcement ceremony, the room fell into a silence deeper than any courtroom ever achieved. He didn't speak like a hero. He spoke like a man who remembered what it felt like to be buried alive under manufactured failure. "I never wanted to be a symbol," he said. "I just wanted to do my job without lying about what I saw." He paused, then looked directly into the camera. "Truth shouldn't have to come with a cost this high, and if it does, we're going to make sure someone else pays it next time." The audience stood. Some clapped. Some cried. Even Jasmine, standing just behind him, had to look away for a moment, steadying herself on the edge of the podium. From that day forward, TruthGuard began operating in quiet but undeniable ways. It partnered with data scientists to build anonymous reporting systems that routed complaints through decentralized servers. It funded legal fellowships for young attorneys to specialize in whistleblower law. It provided emergency support to engineers, auditors, and compliance officers under threat of retaliation. The call started small: an air traffic technician in Nevada, a software engineer in Virginia, a logistics specialist overseas. But they were real, and every one of them said the same thing: "I saw something, but I didn't know who would believe me." Now they did. Jasmine never turned TruthGuard into a political movement. She didn't need to. It moved on its own. Law firms began building internal TruthGuard liaisons. Contractors started adjusting their compliance standards to pre-qualify for TruthGuard certification, knowing it had become a seal of public credibility. And behind every report, every legal filing, every board meeting, Isaiah Brooks watched, quietly, unflinchingly, as if to make sure that the next voice wouldn't have to scream just to be heard. The same system that once tried to exile him had now made space for him to rewrite its rules. And Jasmine, she stayed behind the scenes more often than not. No longer fighting for airtime, she fought for infrastructure, for permanence. She knew the headlines would fade. The court case would be replaced by a newer scandal, but TruthGuard wasn't built for media cycles. It was built to survive them. When asked in a rare interview if she felt redeemed after all that had happened, she smiled, not kindly, not triumphantly, but with the gravity of someone who knew exactly what that word cost. "I was never trying to redeem myself," she said. "I was trying to make it so the next person wouldn't have to." But when one voice sparks a movement and one case exposes the machinery behind silence, the courtroom is no longer the final destination. It becomes the ignition point for legislative revolution. 3 months after the courtroom erupted and TruthGuard took root, the halls of Congress echoed with a name rarely heard in those marble corridors: Jasmine Crockett. And beside it, always linked, always tethered by truth and fire, Isaiah Brooks. What had begun as a whistleblower's quiet warning and a lawyer's refusal to kneel had now evolved into a national reckoning, and lawmakers could no longer pretend it wasn't happening. The images from the trial still lingered. Jasmine standing alone, tablet in hand, dismantling a system built to discredit her. Isaiah's unflinching presence as he turned injustice into oversight. But this time, the stakes were no longer confined to a courtroom. This time, the target was federal law itself. A bipartisan coalition, yes, bipartisan, stood before the Senate Judiciary Committee with one goal: the proposal of the Crockett-Brooks Act. The name alone carried heat. It didn't sound procedural, it sounded personal. It was a signal that the days of passive reform were over. The bill's opening statement was sharp and unapologetic. This legislation is introduced in direct response to the events surrounding the wrongful termination of federal contractor Isaiah Brooks and the unlawful suppression of legal advocacy by attorney Jasmine Crockett. The failure was systemic, the damage was avoidable, and the consequences must now be structural. The first pillar of the bill? Freedom of speech in legal proceedings, not for corporations, but for the individuals within them. The act made it explicitly illegal to punish or penalize attorneys, plaintiffs, or witnesses for engaging in public discourse related to matters of public safety, ethics, or civil accountability, as long as no classified information was disclosed. Jasmine had been sanctioned for warning the public about a threat. Under the Crockett-Brooks Act, that sanction would have been unconstitutional. Her voice would have been protected by statute. And now, it would be. The second clause went even further. It mandated that any U.S. defense contractor receiving federal funds must establish an independent ethics oversight board, a permanent third-party committee with investigative power, access to internal compliance systems, and authority to halt deployments if safety concerns were raised. These weren't advisory groups or internal compliance desks hidden under legal. These were independent entities with teeth. Their members would be selected from a rotating panel that included legal scholars, retired federal judges, and civilian representatives, some of whom would be nominated by watchdog organizations like TruthGuard. Companies that failed to comply would lose access to federal bids for 5 years. No appeals, no waivers, no secret backroom lobbying. But it was the third section of the Crockett-Brooks Act that hit with the most force. Whistleblower retaliation would now be treated as a federal crime, not just a civil infraction. Terminating, demoting, isolating, or discrediting a whistleblower who raised a legitimate concern about safety, fraud, or ethics would carry a mandatory minimum fine of $500,000 per offense, and in severe cases, up to 3 years of prison time for the individuals responsible. It was no longer enough to say, this shouldn't happen. Now it would cost something when it did. The pushback was instant. Lobbyists swarmed Capitol Hill, warning of overreach, of burdensome regulation, of stifled innovation. But the public sentiment had shifted. The Crockett hearing had been broadcast on every major network. Clips of Jasmine's courtroom defense had gone viral. Isaiah's appointment to TruthGuard had been hailed as the restoration of dignity long overdue. Voters, Democrat, Republican, Independent, weren't seeing this as a partisan issue. They saw it as a question of survival. If the truth wasn't safe, no one was. And so the pressure on lawmakers became undeniable. The testimonies before the Senate subcommittee were unlike anything seen in years. Jasmine Crockett herself took the stand, not as a victim, but as a voice of lived reform. Dressed in charcoal gray, firm and unwavering, she recounted not just her case, but the consequences of a culture that equated silence with compliance. "This isn't about lawyers winning arguments," she told the room. "This is about engineers being able to say, 'There's a problem,' without losing everything they've worked for. This is about protecting the people we depend on to protect us." Then came Isaiah. His voice was calm, measured, but every word landed like a nail in the coffin of the old way. "I did my job," he said. "I reported a software vulnerability that could have been exploited by our enemies. For that, I was branded a threat. Not because I endangered the system, but because I threatened its comfort." He paused. "If Jasmine hadn't stood up for me, I wouldn't be standing here at all. This law shouldn't exist because of what happened to me. It should exist so no one else has to go through it." That was the moment the room changed. The bill passed committee with a rare unanimous vote. It moved to the floor, gaining co-sponsors daily. And when it finally passed the House, 307 to 124, it marked one of the largest legislative wins for whistleblower protection in modern history. The Senate followed a week later. The president signed it within 48 hours. The Crockett-Brooks Act became law. And with it, everything shifted. Defense contractors scrambled to meet the new oversight requirements. Independent review boards sprang up, filled with ethicists and investigators empowered to halt unethical operations in real time. HR departments rewrote whistleblower protocols under federal scrutiny. And attorneys across the country, many of them young, many of them inspired by Jasmine's stand, found themselves with new tools, new leverage, and finally protection. But legislation alone doesn't rewrite culture. That came slower. In classrooms, in boardrooms, in late-night conversations between engineers and analysts, wondering if speaking up would still ruin them. And in those quiet places, the names Crockett and Brooks began to carry a different weight. Not as martyrs, not even as heroes, but as a new standard, what it looked like when truth didn't just survive, but rebuilt the system that tried to crush it. And as Jasmine sat at a panel 1 year later, watching a new generation of attorneys walk up to the mic, not to thank her, but to build on what she started, she realized something deeper than victory. She hadn't just changed the law. She had changed the consequence of silence. The courtroom had changed the law, but it was what happened beyond those walls, across campuses, screens, and global headlines, that proved something far greater. The world had been watching, and it would not forget her name. It started quietly. A handful of law professors, teaching constitutional procedure in dimly lit lecture halls, began rewriting their syllabi. The Jasmine Crockett case, once controversial, was now being cited as a primary precedent for modern public interest litigation. Within a semester, it was formalized. Harvard Law, Yale, Georgetown, Berkeley, and dozens more added Crockett v. Barrett to their top 5 foundational case studies in public law and legal ethics. Not just for the legal outcome, but for the questions it forced future lawyers to ask. What happens when law and morality diverge? When silence is enforced not by violence, but by process? When the truth must be spoken outside the courtroom to make the courtroom listen? Students dissected every frame of her courtroom presentation. Not just the evidence, but the language, the posture, the precision of a woman standing alone, unflinching, armed with nothing but a tablet and moral clarity. Law review articles called it the pivot point in 21st century civil advocacy. Clinics were renamed. Moot court exercises adapted real transcripts from her trial. One professor described it bluntly. "It's not that she broke the system, it's that she showed us exactly where it was already broken, and then challenged us to fix it, piece by piece." And in lecture after lecture, her voice, recorded, archived, studied, was no longer just that of a lawyer. It was the voice of a movement, but academia was only the beginning. Somewhere in Los Angeles, a Netflix executive had watched the trial footage alone, stunned, eyes fixed to a split screen showing Jasmine's original video beside the doctored one used in court. The image haunted him. A month later, a team of documentarians reached out. They weren't interested in sensationalizing the scandal. They wanted to tell the whole story, the buried reports, the edited videos, the threat of imprisonment, the night-long investigation, the moment she flipped the courtroom upside down with nothing but the truth. The result was a six-part series titled Contempt, the Jasmine Crockett story. It opened with a single shot, Jasmine in her black t-shirt walking alone into the federal courthouse, tablet in hand, voiceover soft but sharp. They told me I was too loud. What they meant was I was saying something they didn't want heard. The series dropped worldwide at midnight. By 3 a.m., it was the #1 trending title in 72 countries. Critics called it a masterpiece. Viewers called it a wake-up call. In Brazil, law students held watch parties. In South Korea, government reform groups hosted panel discussions after each episode. In Kenya, a university law department added it to their comparative justice curriculum. By week's end, Contempt had shattered the record for the most rewatched docu-series in platform history. But more than numbers, it ignited something deeper, a global dialogue about truth, about courage, about the price of doing what's right when power says to sit down and shut up. And in the center of it all, Jasmine Crockett emerged, not just as a lawyer, not just as a name on legislation, but as a symbol. Her image began appearing on murals across inner-city schools. Not with a raised fist, but with a calm stare, and the words beneath, "I did not apologize for the truth." Editorials in The Atlantic and Le Monde called her a new archetype of ethical leadership. She was interviewed on 60 Minutes, BBC Hard Talk, and Al Jazeera. But every time her tone remained the same, grounded, unpolished, urgent. "I'm not interested in being a celebrity," she said. "I'm interested in building a system that doesn't punish people for telling the truth." Time magazine named her Person of the Year. Not just for her legal triumph, but for what they called a model of modern civic bravery. Her face appeared on the cover, not smiling, not triumphant, just looking directly at the reader, as she had looked at the judge, the jury, the world. But it wasn't just adults who noticed. High school debate teams began choosing the Crockett Doctrine as their topic. A children's book publisher released a nonfiction title called Jasmine vs. Goliath, adapted for readers aged 10 to 14. One passage read, "When no one would stand with her, she stood anyway. And sometimes that's all the world needs to start changing." In classrooms from Detroit to Dakar, her story became a parable for integrity, not the kind taught in slogans, but the kind etched in the scars of real consequence. Yet Jasmine refused to be idolized. She rejected awards that tried to place her above the people she fought for. She gave speeches, yes, but they were short, sharp, and always ended the same way. "I didn't do this alone. I just said the quiet part out loud." Still, the reality was unavoidable. Jasmine Crockett had become a living reminder that courage could still disrupt the systems built to suppress it. And the world, finally, was listening. The auditorium at Harvard Law School was unlike any courtroom Jasmine had stood in. It was larger, grander, but quieter. Not in volume, but in history. The walls bore the weight of centuries of legal theory and institutional reverence. The polished wood of the stage floor gleamed under soft lights. Every seat was filled. Professors, students, legal scholars, and federal judges, all gathered for the centennial lecture on ethics and law in the 21st century. And at the center of it stood Jasmine Crockett, wearing a dark suit, minimal jewelry, no teleprompter, no note cards. Just her voice and the silence of a room ready to receive it. She looked out at the rows of future attorneys, policymakers, and defenders of the law. Some had come expecting inspiration. Others had come hoping to study her technique. But what they got was something different. Jasmine's voice, when she began, was quiet, controlled, but every syllable landed with the force of a hammer wrapped in velvet. "I'm not here to celebrate my career," she said, "because what you saw wasn't a career. It was a survival story, and some days it still feels like one." The room froze, not out of discomfort, but attention. Everyone knew the headlines. Everyone had seen the documentary. Everyone had followed the Crockett-Brooks Act. But here was the woman behind the legacy, unfiltered and unpolished, pulling back the curtain one last time. She spoke of the courtroom, of the gavel that nearly silenced her, of the edited video, the gag order, the threat of jail, the choice to speak anyway. "I was told I had disrespected the court," she said, her voice rising just slightly. "But I didn't disrespect the law. I disrespected the silence it was using to cover its eyes. Gasp didn't come from shock, but from recognition. Because deep down, every law student in that room had already begun to sense what she had lived. That sometimes the system wasn't broken. It was operating exactly as designed to protect the powerful from discomfort. She stepped to the edge of the stage now, closer to the front row. "You will be taught that the law is objective," she said. "But I'm here to tell you something no textbook will. Objectivity without empathy is indifference. The law is not a machine. It is a living thing, wielded by people, and people choose what it sees, what it hears, and what it ignores." The light seemed to dim, or maybe it was the silence thickening. Jasmine took a breath, one hand open at her side. "And here's the truth no one tells you in law school. If you do this right, if you defend someone who's meant to be buried, if you uncover something meant to stay hidden, you will not be congratulated. You will be punished. You will be made to feel like the criminal. You will be told to apologize for being disruptive. And the louder the truth becomes, the more gentle your voice will be asked to become." Students were leaning forward now. Professors sat still, hands folded, some nodding slowly. "But you must not fold, not when it matters." She paused, then delivered the line that would be etched into every law journal, graduation speech, and legal classroom for years to come. "Law without heart is hollow justice, but heart without discipline is chaos. What we need, what this world needs, is the courage to hear the truth, even when the truth offends the powerful." The room exhaled, not with applause, not yet, but with the tension of souls absorbing something that demanded to live inside them longer than the moment. She continued, her voice calmer now, but never softer. "I wasn't brave because I wanted to be. I was brave because no one else was stepping up, and because one man's life, Isaiah's life, was being rewritten in real time by people who thought their comfort was more important than his truth." Her words were slow now, measured, deliberate. "I stood alone in that courtroom, but not because I didn't have people who believed in me. I stood alone because the structure of that space was built to isolate voices like mine. Voices that don't fit the mold. Voices that ask why we follow rules written to serve a few." She looked up, scanned the room, and dropped her final truth. "You can be brilliant. You can be strategic. But if you don't have the spine to stand when no one claps for you, when they threaten you, when they smear you, when they try to bury you, you will lose the law's soul while defending its shell." There was a beat of silence, then another. Then came the standing ovation. But Jasmine didn't smile. She didn't bask. She nodded once, stepped back from the podium, and disappeared behind the curtain before the applause reached its peak. Because this wasn't about the performance. It never had been. It was a message delivered, a torch passed, a final reminder that courage is not the absence of consequence. It's the choice to walk into it, eyes open, heart steady. And in that room, filled with the future of the justice system, Jasmine Crockett left not just as a legal figure, but as a blueprint. A living legacy etched not in awards, but in scars that proved one unshakable truth. When power demands silence, the most radical act is to keep speaking anyway. And when the noise faded, the policies passed, the speeches ended, and the spotlight moved on, what remained wasn't fame, or law, or victory, but a single human question. What does it truly cost to do the right thing when the world begs you not to? Jasmine's story wasn't just about law, it was about loneliness, about the moment when a person chooses truth, knowing full well that the truth may not protect them. It was about standing in the center of a system designed to grind dissent into dust and refusing to lie down. She didn't wear armor into that courtroom. She didn't carry a legal army. She walked in with a single voice and the knowledge that everything she'd built, her reputation, her firm, her freedom, could be destroyed by a single misstep. And yet she spoke, not because she was fearless, but because she feared silence more than consequence. That is the human lesson beneath all the headlines. The most dangerous kind of bravery isn't loud. It's steady. It's deliberate. It's the decision to act when your hands are shaking, your voice is cracking, and everyone else is backing away. Injustice, Jasmine learned, doesn't always wear the face of a villain. Sometimes it wears a suit, a badge, a robe. Sometimes it sits behind a desk with clean hands and a polite smile, using language like procedure, decorum, protocol to justify the quiet destruction of those who dare to speak. Isaiah Brooks was erased not with violence, but with paperwork. His record was rewritten, his warnings buried. And when Jasmine refused to let him vanish, they tried to erase her too. Not with force, but with fines, gag orders, threats. The system didn't attack her with rage. It came with silence, wrapped in law, polished and cold. And yet, through it all, she stood, not because she believed she would win, but because she believed the truth deserved to be heard, even if no one clapped at the end. What Jasmine's journey teaches us is that morality without courage is just theory. That ethics, if not enacted, are nothing more than words on a wall. She didn't wait for permission to defend the defenseless. She didn't ask whether telling the truth would be convenient. She acted and paid for it, in fear, in isolation, in public scrutiny. But her defiance revealed something deeper. When we allow institutions to silence truth in the name of order, we create a world where survival depends on silence, not integrity. And that world, no matter how legal it looks, will always be unjust. Her story is not a call to rebellion. It is a call to remembrance, a reminder that laws are only as just as the people willing to enforce them with conscience. That justice must be lived, not just legislated. That when we see someone being crushed not for doing wrong, but for daring to do right, we are obligated not to look away. Because if we let the whistleblower fall, the advocate burn, and the truth teller drown, then we are not defending law, we are defending comfort. So what is the final lesson? It's that truth will always ask something from you. It will never leave you unchanged. And sometimes it will cost you everything, your career, your reputation, your peace. But in that loss, there is a deeper gain, the quiet, unshakable knowledge that you did not abandon the truth when it needed you most. Jasmine Crockett didn't choose this fight, but when the fight came for her, she stood. And by standing, she gave the rest of us something priceless. A living example that justice is not found in rules, but in courage. And in a world begging for silence, sometimes the most human thing you can do is refuse to be quiet. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.